The next piece I wanted to show you is called A Line Describing the Sun. And I made this over a course of a couple months last year in the desert. And the project basically involved taking a giant magnifying glass and using it to melt a line in the desert. But what I wanted to kind of tell you about is how the process of making this piece involved this kind of circuitous or roundabout route. I'll pronounce better. In that, the original idea came, years ago, and then through trying to solve things preemptively, problems that I hadn't yet dealt with, I kind of got off track into other areas and would naturally come back in the end to the original idea. And in some ways, that's kind of what happened with this project as well. But I'll just tell you that, so in my research about the temperature at which soil melts, I mistakenly thought that the desert would consist of sand, which melts at like 3,000 degrees, much hotter than any magnifying glass that I could make. So in this like 10 minutes of internet research, I immediately abandoned the idea of melting the desert and went right to using sugar, because I knew that that's like 200 degrees, and it creates this really beautiful caramelized mark, and it's also food, and there are also sorts of possibilities. And I went ahead with this project in that I would put down a layer of sugar, melt that, and then record the process of its erasure over time. So I scoped out, using Google Earth, like these little playas that I would kind of bisect, and was prepared to make some sort of wildlife video, basically. I had begun making the apparatus and finally did a few tests, out at Floyd Bennett Field just to see how it worked, and finally decided on this kind of steel structure that I could disassemble and take out to Wendover, where I started working on this. Well, I'll show you 2 minutes of this now, but the short end of the story is that when I finally got to the Mojave Desert, where I shot this final piece, and I set up the lens, like the ground just began to bubble and melt and turn into this beautiful black glassy substance, something that I could never have anticipated, but was like more permanent and at the same time fragile than I had thought possible. So here's 2 minutes of A Line Describing the Sun. Can we turn down the lights even more? This is a nice piece. Great. As I mentioned before, what I loved about this piece is that there was this permanent action that happened in that the soil that was changed into glass will not go back into soil. It'll turn to dust, but it won't. That's not a reversible thing, at least not in my lifetime. Yet the mark is still incredibly impermanent in that it's very thin, and even a few months later when I went back, a lot of it had already kind of blown away. The other thing that I hadn't anticipated was that the piece didn't end with the sun going down as I thought at first. Instead, the clouds came in, and one force kind of gave way to another, and the last shot is this kind of dust just blowing across the playa, which contributes to its erasure. The original mark is 365 feet, and I should have mentioned that it's entirely determined by the course of the sun across the sky. I have one back wheel that I can turn, but the lens always needs to be perfectly perpendicular to the sun in order for the magnification to be at its hottest. Before I showed the piece at my gallery in Brooklyn, I went back out west and did another all-day performance. But this time, instead of basically trying to move the cart as fast as I could, as fast as the sun would melt the line, I turned the wheel at a much sharper angle and ended up just making a 17-foot mark, one that I could excavate using water and take back to the gallery to kind of show, in a way, what this actually looks like. The installation, the video is installed on two 16 by 9 foot screens flat with the floor, and we illuminated the mark with just a single line of light, which kind of allowed you to see it, but also kept the room really nice and dark.